Welcome, League of Legends fans, to the No FFs podcast, a League of Legends esports podcast that focuses on getting information out to you quick. And we're going to hit things hard, we're going to hit things fast, and we're going to get a little wild in here. I'm your host, Zing Lee. I've been covering League esports since Season 5, so this is my 4th world cycle that I'm heading into in 2019. It's crazy thinking back on how little I knew about the game when I first got in. I was writing really simple recaps on what happened and just trying to keep up with the players on the map and figuring out what's going on. And now I'm a writer for Dot Esports. I've been writing there for about 3 years. If you're not familiar with Dot, this is where I put all my thoughts about the game that I love, different regions, LCS, LEC, LCK. We watch it all, we write about it all, and this podcast will cover it all. I also co-host the Recall podcast with my buddy at Dot, Aaron McCunis. We are actually in the middle of rebranding that podcast to The Cool Down. So if this is the first episode of this podcast and you heard it here first, The Cool Down is the other podcast. It's all about League of Legends, both the game as well as esports, and that's what you're going to be wanting to listen to in 2019 and beyond. Now, as far as this podcast, No FFs is all about getting straight through all the crap that happens right to those key moments in each game that change the whole game or change the whole series. If you're in solo queue, that's that big fight that goes one way, that right afterwards the FF, that starts coming across, hashtag or /FF, people are wanting to forfeit, this game is over. We're going to dive right through and find that point. Of course, this is No FF, so we never give up and we never surrender. The other thing about this is we don't give any Fs about what's going on. I don't care if you're league leading G2 or Fnatic. I don't care if you're the worst team in the league, you're H2K or an NA or Golden Guardians. We're going to call everyone out and we're going to keep things real. Part of this podcast, the theme of this podcast is we're going to cover things very, very fast. So I looked at the League esports scene and what podcasts were available on the different platforms, and I thought there was a need for people that, they had a favorite team, they watched that team, but it's really hard sometimes for busy people to keep up with all 10 LCS or LEC, LCK teams and watch the full roster of these wonderful games that we're having. So I'm going to try to cover each league in 15-minute episodes. So this is going to be crazy. I've never tried to do anything like this before. I've done like really short things, like 2-minute long things, but we're going to try to cover an entire league in just 15 minutes. I've got my internet timer here, so let's go ahead and get started. The first league that we're covering with this podcast is the LEC. That's because the LEC starts in just one day now. So I'm recording this on Thursday, the 17th of January. It's going to start up. The first games is Fnatic versus SK Gaming, a classic rivalry in the region. That starts on Friday. So this podcast will probably drop sometime around when the LEC starts for the 2019 season. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down what's going on in this league, what we expect to happen going in, and we're going to get right to it because we don't have any time. We're down to 14 minutes. So if you're not familiar again with Dot, I've written a lot about the LEC. I picked out 5 players to watch in the coming year. So we got Perks moving the bot lane, Febiven coming back to the region, Humanoid for Splice, Mowgli for Vitality, and Patrick, who is known by Sheriff, he's going to be the bot laner for Origin. And we're going to cover all these players as well as their teams. I've created, a place on Dot Esports where you can revisit the offseason. All the roster moves that happened in this region are summarized here. And then we have our preseason tier list. Now we put this tier list out before we knew 100% where all the rosters were. You'll notice at the end there's SK Gaming. It's just a mystery tier. We'll talk about them because they released their roster a little bit later. I had the opportunity to talk to Alex Mueller and Mr. Lalilu and Sheepy, the head honchos over at SK, to figure out what they're going to do in 2019. And I think I have a fair idea of what they're going to do, and we'll be able to rank them a little more accurately in this podcast. Real quick before we get started, 2 sites I feel like you should definitely get into and support and that I use, as you can see in my browser tabs, are Games of Legends. So it's gol.gg, Games of Legends Esports. This site has your complete match history, champion histories. I'm going ahead and gonna hide my bookmarks. I don't know why I have them here. Um, 1 second. Games of Legends is a great site for you to just get acquainted with the game on what happened from a statistical perspective. The other site that I'm going to use a lot is obviously Gamepedia, Leaguepedia. This is run by River Reingold. She's a really big influencer in this league esports scene, and I can't understate what guys like Tim Sevenhusen and Oracle's Elixir and the guys behind Games of Legends have done for our collective understanding of the game. They need our help. So if you haven't heard, Riot is changing some of the ways that they're handling match data, and it's going to make things harder for these guys. And it's already really hard to make money off of a website like Games of Legends or a wiki like Leaguepedia. So if you can spare a moment, this is where I do a ton of my research. I go and look at what's going on to confirm what I saw with my eyes when I watched the matches, and it's also really helpful to go back and remember. At 4 years in, it's really hard for me to pick out a specific game and remember what happened. So these are two great resources. We'll be using them a lot as we go through this rundown of the LEC. So we are down to 11 minutes. Oh my goodness, we have to get going. So the first team that we're going to look at is Excel. So the starting roster for Excel is expected to be Expect in the top lane, Cadril at jungle, Exile mid lane, Jesla bot lane, and Kasing at support. So the first player they signed was Kasing because they liked his leadership and his veteran status within the league. And then they kind of signed a bunch of spare parts around him. Expect, he was good with G2, and he got a lot of credit when the G2 was winning. They won 4 straight LCS championships. But it seems like after they struggled a little bit at international events, and over the last couple years, the shine has kind of worn off of Expect. One thing that I've written about, and I believe strongly, is that I love importing Koreans as a duo. So top jungle, jungle mid, AD bot lane, and support. And this is a really weird situation where Expect is coming in. He's got a people think of Cadril as a young jungler, but he's actually been in, regional leagues and around the European LCS previously seen for a long time. So, even though that a lot of people got introduced to him last year when he was a full-time starter for H2K, he's actually been here for a while. So I'm really curious to see how this pairing works together. And the same thing for Exile, right? He's been, he's a third-year veteran now coming out of Unicorns of Love. That was a team that, started off a little hot and maybe underperformed at the end. It's anyone's guess what we're going to get out of Exile coming into this year. And then the young player is Jesla, who, he's a player that has played in, the Spanish leagues for a long time, or not for a long time, for the last year. And we got to see him play kind of traditional AD carries like Tristana, Caitlyn. I'm really interested to see how he adapts to the LEC. I have to stop saying LCS. It's the LEC. That's going to be the key, because I look at this roster and I'm not sure the top 3 players, these Expect, Cadril, and Exile, are going to be the ones that carry them to the promised land. If this roster has any shot of getting into 5th, 6th, and making playoffs, it has to be on the back of the bot lane. They signed Kasing first to be that leader and to bring Jesla along. And even looking long term, he's the player with the highest ceiling. So, this is a roster that doesn't jump out to me as one that's going to contend next year. It's going to be really hard to see what they have in the spare parts that they have, and then they just need Jesla to pop off in a way that we may not expect. So that's Excel. Moving real quick to Schalke. Schalke brought back an entirely new roster. So they were hurt a little bit by the franchising process, where they initially weren't supposed to be in the league, and then they were added back in at the last minute. So they, were preparing to release all their players, and then they had to scramble a little bit. So they brought back all these new players. The one I wanted to focus on is Abidaj. He's someone that has played in the Turkish league before, and he was a starter there. And I actually really like Abidaj. For one, European mids and tops are some of the strongest players in the world, right? So if you're looking at domestic talent, the solo lanes are where it's at, and he has acquitted himself well in the Turkish league. He had some pop-off performances against good teams, and so I like the fact that he's played in pressure situations, and I think he'll be acclimated to the LEC rather quickly. Memento, I feel like, had a real breakthrough year. He's been an LCS player for a long time and never had, he's been a champ, but like, I feel like he didn't have for years that like kind of signature, I'm going to make this team my own. He finally had a little bit of that. I want to see him continue that on Schalke with Abadaj. Upsetting Ignar, upset is good. He was one of those guys that, he would get caught a few too many times in the late game. Ignar is another guy that, he was well known when he played for Misfits, but now that he left Misfits last year, and we figured out that Hans Sama was good without him. So it's like, what are they getting in Ignar? And then Odo Amne also has a lot to prove, because he had a bad year for Splice last year as well. And then finally you move to coach, and a lot of people were giving Dylan Falco a lot of props for Fnatic making Worlds. It's my opinion that had a lot to do with Young Buck, who is his boss, I guess, and now is the manager and coach of Fnatic. And so this is a team with a lot to prove. I'm not sure that they, again, like Excel, contend for one of those playoff spots given how competitive the rest of the league is. But if Abadaj can pop off of the middle lane, you think back to how Jizuke surprised us at the spring split of last year. That's what they need, because I just don't know that these side lanes are strong enough to win on their own. Moving on to Fnatic, obviously the one guy we have to cover with Fnatic is Nemesis, their new mid laner. Rasmus, Caps, Winter left for G2, Broxa, Reckless, all the guys did not like that situation. There is some bad blood, which I love. I love it when there's a little bit of drama in the LEC. So this is a guy, Nemesis, who also played in the European leagues. He played in European Masters. He played a bunch of champions, so I love this champion pool. You've got some classic mid lane mages. You've got the Aurelias, the Zoes. The win rate's a little lower than you would have liked, but he's willing to play a broad range of champions, 80 bruisers here, and that's what you really need in replacing Caps. Not that we necessarily can replace Caps because he's the best mid laner. Nemesis even said that Caps is the best mid laner in the region, but we want someone that can be flexible so that when Broxa's trying to spread resources around the map, right? They've invested a ton in the side lane. So they have Reckless, who's always a high resource carry. They re-signed Blipo to a long-term contract in the top lane. So I want to see him try to step in and be flexible and allow them to win through those side lanes and then learn. I still think this can be a great team, top 2 team, potentially championship team with Nemesis in the mid lane. G2 Esports, that's where Caps went. That's where the bad blood is. I love this for Perks, specifically moving to the bot lane. I don't think he'll miss a beat. I think he really loved. Aaron and I talked about this on the Recall podcast. How Perks, loved playing funnel. That worked out really well for G2. He loves having someone just be his little, be in the jungle following him around. So why not have that in the bot lane with Mickey X? I think Mickey X has something to prove after getting dropped from Misfits, and he has some real up and down performances with Misfits. Overall, I say he's still a strong player, one of the best in the region, but definitely had some kind of iffy decisions in big moments. So there's a lot to prove here. But the player that I'm most concerned about with G2 is Jankos, and it's interesting that they signed him for a 2-year contract. Most of the guys got re-signed for 3 years. This is where I'm concerned with Jankos. Sejuani, 50% win rate on 10 games. Skarner, 60% win rate, 10 games. Gragas, 40% win rate, 10 games. Zach, 57% win rate, 7 games. I don't know that Jankos is a great traditional jungler. If you look at his performances on Olaf, who's a higher resource jungler, loves to go fast, loves to invade, loves to put pressure on the map early. Talia, same thing, lots of early power. I feel like he's a higher resource guy. And now you've got Wunder, who's a high resource top laner, Caps in the mid lane, and Perks in the bot lane. I just don't know about the fit with Jankos. Jankos, to me, has a lot to prove. I think he had a down year last year, despite G2's good performance at Worlds. I want to see a better Jankos in 2019, someone that can play the tank junglers as well as the carry junglers and really make good decisions on when to engage all in and just have the team behind him 100%. So that's what I'm looking forward to from G2. Next up, we have Misfits. Misfits, this is the stacked roster, the all-star roster. So you have Soaz, low resource top laner, can hold his own with the best in the world. Max Lore, super smart jungler, showed last year what he can do, even with some issues in the solo lanes, specifically mid. You have Hans Sama Gorilla. Hans Sama is a beast. he might be considered the best ADC in the region, with Reckless, kind of in and out of the lineup last year, with Funneling not picking up the bruisers, which again for Fnatic, that is a concern because bot lane is not 100% traditional yet. We have yet to see what they're going to do with crit items with the start of the season, but you're seeing stuff like Yasuo, Karthus in the bot lane. So, Reckless is a question mark there. Hansam will be able to pick that up. Gorilla, we think, will be really good. Again, I like Koreans as a duo, but I think Gorilla is good enough and Hansam is good enough that they can make it work. And there's enough shot calling here and top and jungle that they can also, supplement Gorilla's shot calling in his brains with abilities to communicate in other positions. The guy that I'm actually most curious about for Misfits and is going to be key to the success is Febiven. Febiven went to NA last year off of a really successful season with Fnatic. He joined with Clutch Gaming. They had a great spring where they unexpectedly made playoffs and knocked off TSM. And then this happened in summer. And this is what I'm concerned about. Swain, Syndra, Azir, Orianna, Lulu, Ryze. These are all traditional mid-lane mages. Febiven, to me, did not adapt to the summer meta of a lot of Aurelia. Akali Kemet came on later. He didn't adapt to the Scion, the, Aatrox type of bruiser-heavy AD mids. And that's a big concern for me coming into the next year because those champions are still good. The meta hasn't actually changed that much in preseason. Urgot's being played a ton in the mid lane. And, this is a player who has championship pedigree, who's known as one of the best mids in the region. I don't know that he is at that level for me coming into 2019. You have all-stars all around him, and it's possible to me that Febiven is the guy that lets them down, especially if you look at a potential matchup against Caps and G2 for the championship, which a lot of people have them in that kind of category, or even Fnatic with Nemesis, who has that broad champion pool, can play a lot of different styles. This is the big question mark for me, is Febiven's performance on Misfits. How much time do I have left? It is going fast. A minute. We did not succeed with our 15-minute window. We did have introductions at the beginning. Origin, strong team. Love this team. Alfari, Cole, Nukeduck, Sheriff, Patrick, who's changed his name to Patrick, and Mithy. Mithy's got a ton to prove. I just want to show you this. This is Sheriff, the top number of deaths in the region last summer at ADC. And just because, because H2K was bad, it wasn't just that too. He also died as far as full-time ADCs, the most of anyone on his team. So this is someone that can put out damage, can do well in lane, can do really well with the type of mid-lane pressure that he has, Nukeduck and Mithy as his support. But I want to see that death number go down so that this damage number could go up. I believe that he can do it. He showed that he can do it in certain games with H2K. He just has to do it more consistently. Rogue, this is another, this is a new work coming in. I'm not sure I love this. Wadid, he had I think he'll be solid, but it's, Kjarnan and Wadid, not Hiku and Wadid. Hiku's a good player, don't get me wrong, but I really wonder how the synergy is going to be there. It doesn't, come overnight. Prophet in the top lane, he'll be fine. But again, like Prophet and Kikis, that duo, Kikis was really good with Vitality and fitting in and directing that team last year. Again, this synergy will have to be built. And for me, Senkux is the guy. He, was one of the players on Misfits I feel like let them down the stretch of last summer, resulted in them not making Worlds. And you look at plays like this. This is 2-2 in the regional gauntlet. Misfits versus Splice. Senkux versus Niski. The first problem is Senkux did not win his lane. You look at the scaling potential of a Ryze, a Vayne, even a Trundle on the side of Splice. This team, Yasuo does well for himself, but I feel like this team falls off in the late game, and Senkux did not give them the early pressure that they needed to win, early enough. And this is a 21-minute fight. They're up 2k gold, which is not bad for 20 minutes. They had a few instances where they were diving past tier 2 towers. But this is a play where they're caught too far in the Splice jungle, and you can see, they're getting forced out. They don't have Odo or Alfari with them. Odo Omne is ulting down on Scion, so Splice had priority in this area. And then you look at this fight, the way that it plays out. I'm going to lay this down a little bit. The way that this plays out, Senkux is kind of hanging around the outside. He's not really getting his Qs off. There are no tornadoes coming out. He's exhausted, forced to flash out of the Scion Q. Goes in, doesn't hit a priority target. Misfits get wiped, Splice terror the whole game around. They head straight for the purple worm, and this is just the type of play that, when we think of Senkux, he's got to be able to be clutch in these moments. He's got to be able to play mid lane mages and just be more flexible than he has in the past. I think as a player, the ship has sailed on him being a lane dominant player. I just don't see it. But for this team, for this rogue team to surprise and do better, it has to somehow come from Senkux, because again, I just don't see enough from the side lanes. There's a lot of synergy issues to work out. This is a bottom tier team for me. SK Gaming, I talked to these guys, as I said, they actually locked in their roster very early on in the process. They didn't release anything because they wanted all 5 players to sign and kind of announce it together. But they tunneled on what was the Mad Lions roster from the Challenger regional leagues in Europe. It's a solid team, did really well in those leagues. And they focused on regional talent and young players, which I think is super smart. So they have Relieve, Self-Made, Crown Shots, they're 80. I think this is a really smart move, because if you look at next year, Fnatic's going to be good, G2's going to be good, Misfits is going to be good, Origin's going to be good. It's going to be really tough to say we can contend for the LEC title next year. Their goal is to make it tough for these teams around them. Take some games off and, see what happens. But by developing domestic talent, let's say Crown Shot pops off or Self-Made pops off. Now you can say, okay, we can build around that guy. Who in the top lane do we think we can fit around him that's going to synergize well? Those guys are available. Those guys have moved around in this league this last offseason. Same thing with Crown Shot, AAD, or Dreams, their support. If one of these players can show something, that gives them a very solid foundation to build on for next year. They have domestic players, young players. The ceiling is unknown for these guys. And I also really like them bringing Pyrion in the mid lane, just because it's so hard to win and develop players in League of Legends if you don't have mid pressure. What's the point of seeing what you have in a jungler if he can never invade because mid is getting shoved in? Pyrion's probably a little past his prime. He never was great in NA. He played some games for SKT and won some games in the LCK last year that kind of, gave him some credibility in the mind of Western fans. But I just think that his goal isn't to pop off and be a super carry. I think his goal is to give Self-Made options, so that he's not, if we want to play around river control, we have the option to do that. It's not just, we're going to have to give up the scuttles constantly. So I really like what they've done with this team and the potential for this team to grow into 2020 and become a top 3 or 4 team then, which is their goal. Moving on to Splice. This is a really interesting squad. I like this. They've replaced Odo Omni with a Visage Hachi, which I love. Xerxes needs to get a hold of the meta. He's a guy that I really want to see grow. He kind of had a couple lost years on Unicorns. Last year wasn't great because he just could never fully catch up to the meta, even though this was a playoff team in both splits. Kabi Norskeren, I'm glad they picked up Norskeren. I was shocked to hear that Norskeren might not have a team early on in the process. And then, of course, they have Humanoid in the middle lane. He's another guy that played in the Turkish league, showed a little bit what he could do. Wasn't as good results-wise. So we're looking to see him kind of pick up a few different mid laners as well. This is a very standard mid lane mage champion pool. I want to see him expand that pool and be more flexible for Splice. You can win through top lane. You can win through bot lane a little bit. Kabi's more of a later game carry. His early game numbers aren't great. So we're looking at the mid lane being the key again for this team. It's the key for how Xerxes is going to play and how jungle is going to interact. I really like, again, the potential of the Kabi Norskeren bot lane. And again, like Peter Dunn, their coach is probably top 2 in the region in my estimation. He's super smart. He knows what he wants to do. And if anyone can get a team like this to compete for playoff spots and win a playoff series, it's Peter Dunn. I want to see them do that, develop these 2 players, and focus on that synergy. Finally, Vitality. Last but certainly not least, this is a team that should be in that top 4 conversation, potential finalists. They showed everyone what they could do at Worlds. The meta set up still perfectly for them to split push and exert a ton of pressure out of their solo lanes. They're still set up to do that. The guy that I'm interested in is Mowgli. I think Mowgli, so, we're concerned sometimes about Korean junglers. I actually think Mowgli might fit in really well because he is a very supportive jungler. He's playing Zac, Gragas, Sejuani, Skarner, these guys that just want to support the side lanes when they're pushing, set vision. He's a low resource player. He's no problem giving those blues over to Jizuke so he can throw out echo Qs, whenever he wants, or trade heavily on LeBlanc and regen that mana pool. So I'm really excited to see what he can do with Jizuke. Attila, I feel like he grew a ton over the last year. You can talk about young ADs that want to grow. I feel like Attila was a perfect example. Had a rough spring split. Late game was not their friend, and then grew into that role. And then again, this is the second year of Yamato Cannon. He is a coach that really knows the style that he wants, and that 1-3-1 style is exactly what he wants. Now they can refine it. They can stick with it a little bit more. I'm excited to see what they can do. This is a team probably, they're going to compete with Origin and Fnatic, these teams for that second kind of tier behind Misfits and G2 to me. And if they can get fourth or third and make it in that final, anything can happen with split pushing because it's just so hard to deal with in a case of like one series, figuring out what to do against the type of pressure and the type of champion picks that this dude, the Italian stallion, can pull out. So this is the LEC. We went over a little bit long. We're going to try to keep these episodes shorter throughout the season so that you can catch up on exactly what happened in each game over the weekend. The LEC games play on Friday and Saturday. We're going to try to aim to have this podcast drop in the middle of the week each week and be able to catch you up in just 15 minutes on everything that happened. Real quick before we leave, give us a follow on Twitter. That's where I'm going to interact with you all the most. The handle is NoFFs Pod, so NoFFS-POD. The name of the podcast, NoFFs Pod. My name is Zing Lee. I write for .esports, and we'll catch you next time.